Welcome to How Preschool Teachers Do It.
This is Alison Kentos. I am an early childhood educator.
And this is Cindy Tarabush. I am an early childhood consultant.
This podcast is for parents and early childhood professionals.
Let our experience and research-based knowledge become your guide. Hi, preschool peeps.
Hi, peeps.
We hope that everybody, as we head towards spring renewal, are thinking about some renewal, refreshing, and rejuvenating. There you go. Rejuvenating things that you all can do as we head towards spring, because that's what spring's all about. New life, right?
Spring renewal, yeah.
Yeah, it's what the spring holidays are even about.
Yes.
New life, renewal. So we thought we would, in the beginning of March, kind of focus an episode on that. Yep. And if you're thinking, I don't know, last episode they shouted out a couple places in the beginning. I'm wondering if I'm in one of those places. We're doing that at the end this time. So stick with us.
You know, something new because it's spring.
Well, it's not quite spring yet, but it's on the horizon.
It's also,
it's not quite new. It's not quite spring, but it's on the horizon. So we thought we would talk about this sort of things to think about as we take a deep breath and begin that whole renewal process. That's part of nature. Yeah. And I heard a quote recently, and that's what we're going to base this episode on. And we invite you to think about it with us. It really was a quote that made me pause and think, and I hope it does for you too. It's such a simple sentence. It's just sit with what you have to unlearn.
Yeah, see, it's such a good one. But it is so simple, right? But means so much at the same time.
We early childhood educators who've been in it for a while have had to unlearn a lot of things because things in early childhood education are very different now than they used to be. And I can tell you as a parent, I unlearned a lot of things that I was raised with. I unlearned things from one child to the next. My boys are 4.5 years apart. Unlearned some things that I had done with the older one or thought was right because my younger child was a very different person.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It might not even be that they were 4 years before the other. It was that they're just two different people. So the way you parent your older child is not the same way that the younger child needs. Right. So that is a lot of unlearning.
It's a lot of unlearning because you think you've got this parenting thing rolling, and now it won't work with the second child or the third child or the fourth child, however many you all have. Yeah. And it's also, I've had to unlearn a lot of family dogma. A lot of families do this, families behave this way, families act that way in order to raise my children in an environment that I felt that they should be raised in. Mm-hmm. Right. Similarly, in early childhood education, I have had to unlearn a lot of things. When I think back to when I first started working in this field, I had to unlearn you can just make your own homegrown curriculum and have it be good enough. Yeah. I had to unlearn talking to families based on my own perceptions and opinions rather than research-based facts.
Yes, I think that's something I had to really, really unlearn. Really, and I didn't even think of it until just now. But I think I really had to unlearn that my perceptions were deeply in there in the beginning. And now I know not to do that. And your perceptions are always still in there. But I think, the tools are different. Yes.
Right. We have a different bunch of tools in our toolbox. We have research-based assessments. We have research-based developmental screenings. We have all sorts of research-based tools where we don't need to go off of my experience or perceptions anymore. Right. We can lean on facts based on science and research to do things like make recommendations for children, determine if they might benefit from evaluation by a specialist. Yes. To guide their learning overall. We have way more tools than used to be used in the beginning of my career. So I had to unlearn, I guess it's really unlearning thinking I know more than I did, because I felt like I had a lot of experience and a lot of things to contribute. And then there were times when research told me differently. Yeah. That actually the way these children are behaving is within the expectations for their age. They're not behind. Yeah. They're not struggling. They're right where we expect them to be at this age. Yeah. And without those sorts of tools in our toolbox, we didn't know that.
That's true. That is very true. I think that kind of happened to me when you switch schools too sometimes. Like I remember when I first started in the public school, I remember there were things that I would do at the previous school that I worked at. And the previous school did not have, it was just do what you want kind of thing, make your own curriculum. Every classroom had their own curriculum because it was up to the teacher what to do. And I was so used to that. And then I got into the public school, and it wasn't necessarily like what they have now with these research-based ones where they hand you a box and here you go. But it was also, because I was still doing preschool and early childhood, but it was a little bit more structured. And I remember some of the stuff I remember saying to my principal, and she goes, yeah, no, that's not their level. Like and I was like, but we were doing it at the last school. They're like, what? And I was like, oh, okay. And I unlearned that then, that things were different and they were at the right level. And I just kept thinking maybe they needed more, but really they were right where they were supposed to be.
I think there are a lot of things we've had to unlearn, and I think there's benefit to sitting with it. Don't you think, Alison, that an undercurrent or an underlying theme of our podcast for all these years has been, here's something you need to learn, and there are other things you need to unlearn in order to do this thing that we're talking about.
That is almost like the undercurrent of the podcast. Because when we were talking about this topic, I was like, oh, we could talk about that. And you're like, yeah, we've already done that. I'm like, because I think in this podcast, we are teaching, I think, people to unlearn certain things that have always been a part of early childhood education. And I think a lot of people know differently now, but I think it's always good to kind of go over and review. But you're right. I think that is the undercurrent of this. Here are things that you can unlearn, and here are things that you can learn instead.
But, I think people are very used to being told that sort of thing. They go to professional development sessions. Yeah. They're taught, here's something to learn. Here may be something that you have to unlearn in order to implement that. Right. They go for a variety of different educational opportunities. They have meetings with the leaders, directors, instructional coaches. They have meetings with people who basically are saying, here's something we need you to learn. Now unlearn this other thing. Yeah. Right. I think that this is a consistent thing. I'm not sure that sitting with it,
I think,
is part of that.
Is important because, even the previous episode that we had about gender, I feel like I'm still sitting in that unlearning. I'm still, because to me, unlearning doesn't, just like learning doesn't happen overnight, I feel like unlearning doesn't happen overnight. So I've been sitting in that topic and that stuff for a while now, and I'm still unlearning things about it, Mm-hmm. And I'm much better in a better spot than where I was a year ago, 2 years ago, but I'm still sitting in it, and I'm still learning about it and myself and unlearning about it and myself. But if I didn't
and it's okay to sit in it. It's okay to sit in it.
Because I feel like if I didn't sit in it, I would think, okay, got that covered, done. And it's not that easy. You have to just sit in it and just be for a bit. And you really have to think. You have to think.
I think we have to now, in the year 2023, sit in what we need to unlearn about children's social emotional development, because the world has changed.
Yes. The
children who we're teaching right now spent all, if not the vast majority of their early childhood in basically a pandemic era, which has changed. As much as people have gone back to doing things, it still has changed us as human beings.
Yes.
And it's changed our thinking of things, and all sorts of things you can't see. It has changed mental health, thinking, how we do things, how we think about things, what we are concerned about, what upsets us in a variety of ways. We've been changed by this event. And so the children are growing up in an environment that is different. We have to unlearn some of the things that we assumed would be the case about young children, social, emotional, and how they play with each other, and what their experiences have been. We had this set of expectations about what young children's experiences had been. And that's why people are surprised that young children today don't really know how to play with each other. How do I do this? How do I approach it? It's different than it was in the past.
Yeah, because
so many things from the past have to be unlearned.
Yeah, because before the pandemic, when your class arrived in September or August, whenever you start school, you pretty much kind of knew. Like if you taught grade 1, you're like, all right, I know what kindergarten's like at this school, and that's what the kids got, and they're kind of in this, this level within these levels. But now with the pandemic, not knowing what their early childhood was like, they were in a lockdown for part of this. Schooling wasn't the same. There was homeschooling. There was a year of some kids were being home and some kids were at school. There's also the whole, like, we wore masks for a whole year. So there's the language speech thing. But you have no idea also, like, how the 15, 20 students that are in your class were affected emotionally by all of that. So it's like you're getting, like, you can't expect them to be at the same level that they were. And I think that's a lot of unlearning that a lot of places have not unlearned yet, because I think they think this is business as usual. We're back, there's no more pandemic. So let's just get the kids back to where they were at before the pandemic. But I don't think you should be doing that.
No, I think we have to
unlearn that part.
Unlearn some of those expectations. I also think, many of us, and I'm going to, I don't know, maybe age myself a little bit. Yeah. Many of us from my generation have to unlearn a lot of things that were in our heads about families, how they function, what they should look like. Are they, even things like families being available and able to help their children with what the children are learning at home. I have to unlearn the notion that's good parenting. You can be a good parent and not have the time to devote to helping to add on to their learning from the early childhood education program. We have to unlearn phrases like, well, families should be doing this with the children. That's why the children are behind. No, unlearn that. Sit with it. The world is a busy place, and families have a lot of demands on them. Yes. And so that whole notion of families should be doing X, Y, Z, it just our focus as educators needs to be in our classroom. Here's what I can control. It's in my room. Here's what I should be doing. I can make suggestions to the families. Right. And if they don't do it, that doesn't make them bad parents. That doesn't mean they don't care about their children. That whole, I don't know what it was, like a societal value thing that made people say, well, if the parents don't parent the way I think they should parent, then they don't care about their children. Yeah. Well, unlearn it.
I also think that when we were raised, my mom didn't work until I was like in 7th, 8th grade. So she was always home. But also, if both parents did work, it was very 9 to 5. There was no way to get in touch with you from work after. There was no email. Cell phones didn't exist, And so your parents, when they were home, they were home. They were with you. Now it's not like that. Parents are working all different hours, different jobs. They're contacted at any moment to hop on the computer to do whatever they need for work. It's totally different. So you can't expect these parents to be like available at 5:30 for a parent teacher conference when they might have to work, and that I think is why it is different than when we were kids, because when we were kids, it was very much like, here's your job, you work your job, you go home. And now and it was 9 to 5. That was it, unless you had a different type of job, like a nurse or something at a hospital, you worked 9 to 5. That was it. And you can't expect that anymore. The workplace has changed.
And so when they're home,
have changed.
People are ever connected, right? Yes. They're ever connected. They don't have the same leave your work at work and come home. It is everywhere.
Home. It is everywhere.
Right?
Now. Yeah.
So, your concept of that whole thing, also, we have to sit in the fact that we have to unlearn things having to do with culture. we've said before, no one culture is right or normal or the way to be.
Yes.
We have to unlearn ways of thinking like that. It's not even so much I have to unlearn how to write lesson plans, and maybe you do, but it's also unlearning modes of thinking that we may have grown up with.
Yeah.
That may have not either relate. Maybe they don't relate to our times. Maybe they never should have. Maybe they should have never existed.
Might be true. Yes.
Right.
Maybe they never should have. Yeah. But that's hard to unlearn when you don't realize it never should have been part. I mean, it's so ingrained in a lot of us because that's just the way it was, that it's hard to stop thinking that way. You know, it's really hard to unlearn things.
It is. But as we head toward the next season, this season where things in the outdoors where we are anyway, we have 4 seasons where Alison and I live, very visibly 4 seasons, and things start to come back alive in the spring. I think we do need to sit in these thoughts and think, okay, this thing that has been ingrained in me, this thing I thought, this thing, I really have to give it some thought, reflection, and that's the key to growth, I think. Being able to sit with yourself and think like that.
Yeah.
And I invite you all, preschool peeps, to come up with something, sit with it, come up with something that you realize I have to unlearn this, this point of view, this perspective, this method of doing something, this way that I do it, or this way that I think about it. I have to unlearn it. Not only will the children benefit, and, you know, the title for this episode is For the Sake of the Children, but actually it's for the sake of everyone.
Of everyone,
because that helps us to evolve as educators, as family members, as human beings. So just like when I heard this in the session that I was in, and they said, sit with what you have to unlearn. And then it went silent.
Yeah.
So that we could all sit and think for a second. They didn't say anything.
Yeah.
And I invite you all to just, when you're done listening to us talk at the end of this episode, turn off your podcast provider or your YouTube, close your eyes, think, and sit with what you have to unlearn. I think when we spend enough time to sit with it, we realize why it's so important that we unlearn it, whatever it is. Yeah. And it helps us to adjust. It helps us to accept change when we sit with it and reflect on it.
Yeah.
Always, it's about for the sake of the children, but I'm telling you, your life could be better too if we just unlearn things.
Too. Yes.
If we let go, let it go.
Yeah.
I was recently talking to someone about family traditions and that whole obligatory, everyone has to go to the holiday thing, or everyone has to show up at this family tradition thing. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about, what does that really do when you're young? How does that really make you feel about family gatherings? And no wonder why people grow up not wanting to go. And we were just sort of having this conversation because we were talking about how we raise our children a little bit differently. Yeah. And not that my children don't have a sense of family. They do, but it's approached in a different way. And we were talking about how that older, a more traditional way of thinking about it sort of poisoned the well. When we sit with what we have to unlearn, maybe we can think about how this is sort of poisoning the well. How is how is it not good for the children, for the families, for me and my coworkers? And then it helps you to be willing to do something different, right?
Yes. And then you can really make change.
Hopefully so.
Hopefully, yeah.
Hopefully so.
Yeah.
Okay, folks, it's time to do the shout out. So, around the world, these are, I think, 2 places we haven't seen in our top ratings before.
So, yeah.
Right? I think the first one in the world, Kenya.
Oh, hi, Kenya.
So there are people listening in Kenya. Yeah. And in the United States, there are people listening in Georgia.
Oh, hi, Georgia.
Georgia. Nice. I've not been to Kenya, but I can tell you I've been to Georgia several times. Plus I have family there.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, I do. Nice. But I've been there really for conferences and conventions mostly. And then I brought my husband because I wanted him to see Atlanta. I love Atlanta.
Oh, do you? I've never
I
been
do.
there.
So,
Yeah.
oh, I love it. And so I brought my husband to see all the things that I talk about when I go there and all that Atlanta has to offer. Yeah. So, hey, Georgia, if you happen to be in the Atlanta area, love your area. I love that whole area. And if not, sure, I would love your area too. Please tell everybody to listen and to check us out on Patreon and Facebook and the website and all those lovely places.
Yeah.
Peeps, thank you for continuing to come back. 218 episodes later, who would have dreamt it that we'd be heading toward 250 episodes? We so appreciate your coming back and your listening and being one of our preschool peeps. Okay, now go and sit with what you have to unlearn.
Yes. Yes.
Catch you next time.
Bye, peeps.